In the previous video, we looked at the bad science that should guide our eating decisions. That should happen when three things are present. Number one, when we see a change in eating brings about what seems to be a cure to an incurable condition. Number two, when it happens relatively quickly. And number three, when other people try it and experience the same thing. This is something that we see happening over and over again recently within the low carbohydrate and carnivore eating community. People rolling back or curing what seem to be incurable conditions. There are many examples. You could look at diabetes, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, and many more. This is something that's especially important to me because I experienced it. I used to have ulcerative colitis, and now it seems to be gone. Nonetheless, many people are concerned that if they were to switch to this style of eating, that they might suffer some sort of long-term health consequence. Maybe that they would experience heart problems or increased all-cause mortality. This video takes a look at whether that risk is real, and if you believe that it is, whether it's nonetheless worth it to eat this way. These risk worries mostly come from epidemiological studies. If you look above, you'll see a tab you can click to watch a video we created previously on epidemiology. And what you'll find out from that video is that the scientific community pretty much agrees that epidemiology isn't a very precise science and should only be relied upon when you see very large magnitude changes. Here, we're seeing studies that show relatively small changes in increased risk for people's heart problems and all-cause mortality when they eat this way, meaning we're not seeing the changes of many tens of % that we would see as necessary for epidemiology to be reliable. Even if you did think this kind of science was reliable in this instance, this group of eaters should have a slightly increased risk of those kinds of problems, of heart issues and all-cause mortality, and that it may have nothing to do with the diet. Why is that? Well, the people who would have been early adopters of this form of dieting, meaning low-carb dieting and carnivore eating, would have fit primarily within two groups. The first group would have been people struggling with their weight, meaning people who are obese, maybe diabetic, and that group would already be at greatly increased risk of heart problems and all-cause mortality. Let's first look at obesity. People with a body mass index of at least 30%, meaning the technical definition of obesity, would already be at a 45% greater risk of all-cause mortality, all kinds of death. If you were to then look at people with a body mass index of 35%, it jumps up to an increased risk of 94%. And if you were to look at people who have a body mass index of 40% and greater, their risk of all kinds of death, all-cause mortality, jumps up to almost 200%. If you were to then look at people who have diabetes, they similarly are at greatly increased risk of heart problems and all-cause mortality. In fact, there is a 2 to 4 times increase in the risk of cardiovascular problems among that population. These folks who would have been having trouble with their weight conditions prior to coming to this form of eating, they would have had years, perhaps decades of plaque building up within their cardiovascular system. And it takes a long time for that to go away, even after they begin eating a healthier diet and living a healthier lifestyle. In fact, at one point, people thought it was impossible to reverse that kind of plaquing at all. Now we know that it can take place, but it takes such a long period of time that those people would remain at greatly increased risks of these kinds of heart problems and all-cause mortality for decades after they've switched their styles of eating and other lifestyle choices. The second large group of early adopters of a low carbohydrate or carnivore diet would be what I would call the bodybuilding community. People who are very concerned about their appearance and willing to go to great lengths and take great risks to get that body that they want. These people would have been told that eating this way was unhealthy, bad for their hearts, could harm them in many ways, and yet they chose to do so anyway. That would be among the same group of people that would be choosing to do things like steroids. And we know that steroids greatly increase the risk of heart problems and all-cause mortality. In fact, people who take steroids are at a 200% greater likelihood of all kinds of death, all-cause mortality. The fact that the early adopters of a low carbohydrate and carnivore diet would have probably included very large percentages of people from these two populations, and yet they were only at slightly increased risk of heart problems and all-cause mortality, suggests that the diet may have actually been helping these people. If you nonetheless think that there is a health risk, many would say it's still worthwhile. For example, you could look at Dr. Palmer. He's a Harvard psychiatrist, and he points out that many of the people who adopt this kind of diet already have fairly serious health problems, and that's why they choose to eat this way. These are the kinds of people who might have serious mental health problems, maybe serious conditions of other kinds, and doctors are willing to prescribe these people what we call black box medications, medications with the most serious kinds of health consequences that are very well proven through the best kinds of science, long-term clinical trials. And these health consequences, these side effects, include increased risk of heart problems, dementia, and even early death. And when people take these kinds of medications, it may be assisting them in some ways, but it's probably only managing their condition. It's probably not rolling back the condition or healing them. Yet when people eat carnivore or a low-carbohydrate diet, it appears they are actually healing themselves. In the next video, we'll take a look at why doctors may be slow to update their eating recommendations. Thanks for watching.